The Bonneville Shoreline Trail has been under construction for 30 years. Join me, Brandon Plewe, and my son Spencer as we hike the 200-mile length of the BST to learn about its past, present, and future, and explore the landscape of this boundary between the city and the wilderness. I am really excited today. We are hiking the original section of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail that was built back in the early 90s. In fact, we were here a couple months ago when this kiosk was dedicated to Rick Reese, who was one of the original pioneers of the trail. He passed away recently, but while we were here, we got to talk to Jim Byrne, who was another one of the pioneers of the trail, about how this whole thing got started. Jim, tell us a little bit about kind of how this thing first started and when it first started, the whole idea.
Well, it all started with a meeting that Rick Reese called together some of his friends in 1989.
89.
And I never could figure out who first said the term Bonneville Shoreline Trail, but that meeting was the beginning of the Shoreline Trail. Okay. And there were a number of people there that thought it was a great idea and started working on it. And so for a number of years it was just building support for the idea, and then a proposal to get some funds to start. That was turned into $140,000 with the city and the state matching, and that was the start, basically.
This is actually kind of the spot where the Bonneville Shoreline Trail first started. Back in the middle part of the 20th century, the 40s and 50s, the state had bought up a lot of land here at the mouth of Emigration Canyon to preserve kind of the area where the pioneers first came into the valley.
And they stopped a development to build the park.
It would have been right here on the bench.
It would have been right here. And so part of this is the original piece of the Shoreline Trail there, goes along that little piece of concrete up there that was from a development that got stopped because they wanted to put in this is a Plewe State Park. When we started working with the park, they were fine with having a trail around. They put in some fence up there and said, you need to pay the fee if you're going to come into the park.
Yeah. And that's when Jim Byrne and Rick Reese were able to get in, talk with the state and convince them, hey, you know, these are kind of two different things. So why don't you move the fence back and just fence off the state park part and leave the rest of your land, of the state land, as open space where we can put in this great idea we have for this Bonneville Shoreline Trail. And they were quite successful at that. So by 1992, they were able to fence this part off, but then also designate, the state was the first to designate part of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail over here. And so that's where this whole thing got started.
Working with the park in its various inclinations over the time. I mean, for a while it was a state park, then it was a private foundation, and now it's a quasi
state park.
State park.
Great view down there. This is the Plewe Heritage Park. The monument you can see down there is meant to commemorate the place where Brigham Young, when they were coming down Emigration Canyon, July 24th, 1847, kind of got up here where you could see a view of the valley and said, this is the right place, move on. The ironic thing there is that when he did that, there were already several people who were ahead of him that had been in the valley for 2 days already plowing and planting potatoes by the time he arrived 2 days later. In recent years, they've built this kind of village down there of pioneer houses. A few are replicas, but a lot of them are actually houses that were moved here from various places around the valley and really lots of places around the whole state. So you have this really nice collection of authentic homes and businesses and such where you can see what pioneer life was like. It's a great place to visit.
So that left Parley's crossing to Emigration that's not done in Salt Lake County. The first piece of that was put in last fall, from Parley's to Kerrigan Canyon. They're working on getting it over to Emigration. But at the time, I don't know if you know the history, but that's Spring Canyon there, the first little canyon just south of Emigration. And at the time, in the early 90s, I don't remember the exact year, the Huntsman family had a concern about a kidnapping of one of their kids, and it was they were very concerned about security. And they owned 2 miles up Spring Canyon. And I had a visit from Pat Shea, who was their attorney, said, don't even think about building the trail across here. So I figured, no, that's never going to happen in my lifetime. But now John Knobloch's working on getting it done. Ted Wilson helped with that. He talked to John Huntsman Jr. about it. It was John Huntsman Sr. that, was concerned about the security at the time. And so, maybe.
As we pass the Natural History Museum of Utah and Red Butte Gardens ahead here, the trail here is about as manicured as it is anywhere else in along its entire length. I love these walls and a very interesting building. Red Butte Gardens there, and Red Butte Canyon all get their name from a substantial outcropping up the canyon there of Navajo sandstone, which is most well known in Zion National Park, which was a very popular source of stone early on in the valley. Up there is a big quarry, which is the reason why a lot of the older pioneer homes in Salt Lake City look like they could just as easily be in St. George as here in Salt Lake.
How did the vision expand from Salt Lake to 300 miles we're looking at?
We started thinking about the larger concept of the trail. And the group that we had formed, the Bonneville Shoreline Trail Committee, most of them were all Salt Lake County people, and they wanted to work on the Shoreline Trail in Salt Lake County. So we formed in the mid-90s Bonneville Shoreline Trail Coalition and tried to invite in groups that were interested in the trail beyond, both in Utah County and Davis and Weber and Box Elder and Cache. So for the later years in the 90s, we had regular meetings talking with people and organizing, getting going on plans for the rest of the trail. And that kind of faded around the early 2000s.
Yeah, we're trying to resurrect it now.
But basically, by that time, there was enough interest that it looked like most everybody was going to keep going on their own, and the interest in showing up for another meeting, maybe faded.
The second major player in the early history of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail was the University of Utah, which in 1993 caught the vision of the trail and of kind of outdoor recreation in general and built the trail here through their substantial land that they owned up here on the bench.
We got approval from the university as the first public entity that owned the first section that we thought was a good place to start. And so from here across through the university was the first part of the trail built. And that was probably in 93. They approved a right-of-way for the trail, saying, we might need to move it a little bit if we need to build a new building like the Huntsman Cancer Center, but that we'd have a right-of-way to go across. That's the most heavily used section of the trail of the over 100 miles that have been built so far.
It's very easily accessible, that section.
The university actually wasn't originally here. It was originally down in downtown, just on the west side of downtown where West High School is now. But in 1900, started to build up here on the campus because there's a lot of big empty land. Most of it was actually owned by the military for Fort Douglas, which was a military base first built in the Civil War. I guess this was a nice place to keep an eye on the locals. But the pioneers hadn't much use for this land because there wasn't a way to get water up onto the bench. So there's a lot of available land, and gradually over the years the university kind of bought the land up from the military base to where now there's just a very small military facility, and actually the historic part of Fort Douglas is actually now currently maintained by the University of Utah. But it's a big, beautiful campus here. been really confusing up in this area above the U. There's like multiple parallel trails up here, and it's not totally clear which one's the actual Bonneville Shoreline Trail. But there's an old sign, a little beat up, but it does say that this is the route. So I guess we've been on this upper route that apparently is not the official route. I guess we'll continue on the official trail here. That last stretch coming up the bottom of the canyon there's a bit of a climb, but at least it was mostly shady, decent trail. Although the city does have plans to actually bring the trail up out of the bottom of the canyon and kind of more along the mid slope here on a more sustainable route. That is one part of a master plan that Salt Lake City recently completed for this whole foothills area, almost all of which is land owned by the city, including several sections actually that are adjustments to the original Bonneville Shoreline Trail. This is called the Steiner Centennial segment of the trail because it was originally funded and built in the late 1990s from a grant from the Steiner Foundation, who was kind of the first major private donor for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail.
The Steiner Foundation grants got it all started, and they funded an initial grant of $35,000, and the section from Dry Creek to Davis County is the Steiner Centennial section.
Okay.
And that was completed in 1998.
98. Yeah. And that was a much bigger project. That was like professional builders and more money involved.
That was the $140,000 was to get that in.
But this master plan includes a lot of work up here. In fact, the city completed the master plan and got the funding and started to do construction, including a couple new sections of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail that will be up ahead of us. Unfortunately, at that point, several local residents who apparently had missed out on the whole public meeting and process of publishing the plan suddenly find out that something was going on, got upset, and threatened to sue the city. And the city has had to kind of halt the construction process and renegotiate and work things out for how they're going to do this master plan. But I've heard that it's almost done. They almost have it ready to go, and they're going to be able to start construction on a few sections at least. There's a couple sections up ahead of here that is kind of unsustainable, too steep and stuff that they want to work on. So hopefully that'll be in the near future.
And now the support is there.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to have support if our legislature is putting $5 million in it. So.
Right. Yeah. And I think I added up about $2 million of in this year's round of grants for various BST related projects.
The first grant from the legislature, Ralph Becker got it when he was still in the legislature before he was Salt Lake City mayor, was for $200,000.
The challenge now is that you guys did all the easy work, so the gaps that are left now are really hard.
Well, absolutely. You know, it took 4 years to get the NEPA work done for Salt Lake County. 4 years and about $130,000, I think. You know, if you had to do that for every 15 miles of trail, and you know, that's a lot of work and a lot of time.
Yeah.
And they did the NEPA work in Davis County much faster because they could build on the Salt Lake County work. But the Forest Service has been good about the original proposal made to go across private land, and if problems develop, so far they've been pretty good about move it up the hill a little bit. Ted was the mayor to get the first protection of the North Bench zoning in. They put in an F16 zoning. You had to have 16 acres in order to build above a certain elevation.
Up in the avenues area?
The avenues.
Those of you who have been with us for a while will remember back in episode 4 when we were in Provo, we came across the ruins of an old lime kiln where they mined limestone out of the side of the mountain and processed it into lime that was used in a lot of industrial and agricultural purposes. Well, down there, this is actually Lime Kiln Gulch, and down at the bottom there you can see another lime kiln. That one is in much better shape. That land was actually donated to the University of Utah during the 70s, and in 1976 it was restored with a grant, and so it's in really good shape now and preserved by the University of Utah. But you can see kind of where the limestone was mined up above there and brought down to the lime kiln. Nice little peek down there into City Creek Canyon. At one time, there would have been a lot more timber, a lot more forest down in there, but that was really the major source of timber during pioneer days. In fact, in 1849, before the U.S. Congress had created Utah Territory and the pioneers had organized themselves as the state of Deseret, its General Assembly, one of the first things it did was to grant all of City Creek Canyon to Brigham Young and to the church, because they felt like that was the best way to manage the timber and the water resources up in the canyon. Of course, that was the 1800s, different ethos about natural resources. Nowadays, it's all owned by Salt Lake City, which very carefully manages that canyon and the water and the timber in it, almost like a wilderness area. In fact, this gate is here because these trails that go down into City Creek Canyon don't even allow bicycles, much like a wilderness area. So it's very carefully taken care of. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing great work on this. I saw your Santa Quinn video down there, and I see it's got great promise. You're going to.
Well, it looks like the trail continues up that way, but Spencer and I are hot and tired, and so I think we're going to call it a day and take this shortcut back down to our car. So we will pick up the trail here next time.